Hello everyone and welcome back to another one of these videos. I apologize for a late video this week because I have been sick. I am trying my best not to sound like it. I'm almost better, but that's just, a thing, I guess. Anyway, if you like this video, please let me know. Please comment down below what was your favorite story and why. And also be sure to like and subscribe. It does help quite a lot. And if you have any videos you'd like to share with the channel, please let me know, and I will probably do a video of them. But anyway, enjoy the video. So, about a year ago, I was helping a friend of mine move to New Mexico. She has 3 young kids, so the plan was to take the last little load and her car late at night, so the kids would sleep through the ride. At around 1:30 a.m. after we have been in New Mexico for about an hour, this strange animal just appeared beside us and was running at the same speed as the car. I flipped out and asked how fast she was going. 75 miles per hour. It was right beside us, keeping up and looking directly at me. I can't even really explain what it looked like. Almost like a jackalope, but it was solid grey and had huge black eyes, and was the size of a medium-sized dog. After maybe 30-40 seconds of running beside us, it just took a hard right into the wilderness and disappeared. An hour later, we saw a giant meteor with a huge green, white, purple trail. Any thoughts? I was going with a friend up the canyon to test our super strong flashlight and see if we could light up a mountain. It was a snowy night, and I was the passenger. We were driving for a while when I saw movement on the hillside next to the road, so I looked up and I saw something that looked like a naked figure with long legs get up and start running. It was the fastest I ever saw a living thing move. It quickly ran into the darkness away from the headlights. I pointed and yelled to my friend, and he only saw a glimpse. He couldn't tell what it was, but he saw something, and this confirmed to me that I wasn't just seeing things. It just happened and scared me really bad. I saw some videos about skinwalkers on TikTok, so I started watching videos about them on YouTube, and there was a whole podcast where this guy just read stories about them from Reddit and other stories that people submitted. Well, our warder church purchased a piece of land way back in the day. It's seriously just a wooded area with a little bit of a swamp. Anyways, we would always go there for campouts and scouts, and at night when it was pitch black, we would all play manhunt. Well, one time, we all got down to one person whose name was David. Growing up, he was super fast and he would hide really good, so nobody could ever find him. He would always end up being the last person. Well, one time, it was down to David, and we had split up and gone way deep into the forest towards the swamp because it seems like it was impossible to find him. We thought he might gone a little bit further than we usually go. We started getting into some more muddy and wet terrain as we get closer to swamp-like area where the water is probably shin deep. And we saw David way out in the swamp, and he wasn't wearing any shirt. And with the spotlight on him, he looked super pale. But he just stood there and didn't say a word. You could seriously tell something was off. Then all of a sudden, we heard David from behind us yelling, trying to get our attention, so we would keep trying to chase him down. Meaning, what we saw in front of us was definitely not him. So being a bunch of 12 to 17-year-old boys, we started yelling and running back to the campsite as fast as we could. Nobody believed us. In fact, for years, everybody made fun of it, calling it the ghost of David. But then I started listening to these stories, and every single one of them sounds just like what happened in some way or another. I don't know if this belongs here, but I feel like it bears mentioning. I, 25 at the time, female, experienced what I can only imagine is an otherworldly occurrence when I first moved to the Sierra Nevadas about 4 years ago. I had been living in the South Lake Tahoe for years and spent a decent amount of time outdoors hiking, camping, and just generally enjoying the beautiful place I was lucky enough to call home. Now, I don't scare easily. I'm used to being by myself, and I carry weapons with me everywhere I go. I go out of my way to be sure I can protect myself. There are many people in the outdoor community who told me to be careful on trails and in the forest. I usually do these things alone, save for my trustworthy, though somewhat cowardly dog. But I never felt as uncomfortable, confused, and downright afraid as I did in my own apartment one night when I finally relocated away from Tahoe to the city of Reno, Nevada. I had moved to Reno to get away from the isolation of living in Lake Tahoe, and though it is only about 60 miles away, it felt like a different world. Now the city itself isn't huge, and I was living in the north end of town, which is surrounded by high desert foothills and is somewhat sparsely populated compared to the more urban city center. But I never felt as if I was out in the boonies or anything of the sort. I lived alone with my pup, and we liked our little apartment. So, to set the scene here, it was early fall. The sun was beginning to set at a much earlier time of day, which was exemplified by the fact that the city sits in a valley, so sunset seems to approach much faster than in the other places in northern Nevada. My apartment sat just above street level, with a window in the kitchen next to my stacked washer and dryer that looked out into an alley, maybe about 10 feet above the small street that went beside the small fourplex building. It was dark outside, and I was alone with my dog doing laundry. My apartment layout was an open concept. The living room kitchen area was separated by a wall, which had a huge space cut out of it that you could see through to each room, with the washer and dryer tucked around one corner and the aforementioned window to the left of that. With the openness of that space, the darkness outside, and the amount of overall windows the apartment had, if it was dark outside and I had the lights on, it looked like I was living in a fishbowl or a terrarium. Anyone or anything could see right in it. I made it a point to always close my blinds because of this, save the small window looking out to the alley. I didn't mind keeping those blinds open because I liked the fresh air, and someone would essentially need a ladder to reach me, had they been determined enough. As I was removing clothing from the dryer and turning to plop it onto my couch to begin folding, I realized my dog was acting incredibly strange. He didn't want to cross over the line from the living room to the kitchen, which was marked by the change from a carpet to tile. That was only a few steps. He seemed incredibly hesitant and began whining and burping out small, concerned whiffs. At first I thought he was anxious, for whatever reason. He is known to be a bit of a wuss. Then out of nowhere, I sensed this immense and insurmountable feeling of dread and displacement. I had my back turned to the washer and dryer, and to that small alley-facing window. My dog sat facing me, almost looking past me, and his clear anxiety and frustration began to build. As I was asking him what was wrong, he began barking a full alarm bark at this point, and as soon as he did, the sense that someone or something was observing me took over and caused my blood to run cold. My logical response was, someone must be watching me through the window, the only window that has open blinds, the only window anyone could possibly see me through. So in one fell swoop, I reached for the overhead drawstring for the light and turned it off and faced the window to confront whoever or whatever was intruding on my life. As soon as the light clicked off and the room was dark, I saw what I can only describe as a perfectly round light, about the size of a small cantaloupe, directly across from me on the other side of the window. It didn't glow like a lamp or light though. Its edges were perfect, and it did not hover, nor vibrate, nor move at all. At this point I was too stunned to move, and my fight, flight, or freeze response had engaged so quickly I had no time to really recognize or rationalize what I was seeing. I was looking at this thing, and it was looking back. I felt cold, confused, my hair was standing on end, my heart racing. My dog had gone into full freak-out mode and was jumping and barking and gently causing a ruckus in the living room. As he could see this all, the light seemed to now realize that I was able to see it, and it looked as if it backed away or at least grew small in size, had moved to the right of the window. It flickered twice and then disappeared. It didn't buzz away or fly away. It didn't zoom out of vision. It was visible, not visible, visible, and then gone. As soon as I realized the light wasn't there anymore, I opened the window fully and poked my head out to see what was going on. Maybe someone was up on the window with a flashlight. Maybe someone in the neighboring buildings and would be checking for themselves to try and solve this odd mystery. Nothing. Not a soul. And what felt like deafening quiet. I closed the window. As soon as I shut the window, I heard a solid 3 knocks on the larger window by the front door of the living room. As mentioned before, those blinds were closed, and though from the outside, looking in, it's likely clear someone is home because the lights were on in that room, no one could possibly know it's me alone in my apartment, right? I wasn't expecting anyone over. It was too late for solicitors. No one had any reason to be at my house at that time, and I wasn't going to fucking open that door. My dog had rushed to the kitchen as soon as the light outside the window had disappeared, and he was in what I could only call full defense mode. Now my dog is an absolute wimp. I've seen him run from cats, get spooked by bags blown in the street, and he generally stays right by my side on hikes and while we're camping for me to protect him. This pup seemed ready for war, hackles up, eyes alert, growling at the front window now. I stepped into the living room, grabbed my gun with one hand, keys with the other, and slinked back to the kitchen and out the back door where my car was parked. I threw the dog in, started up, and raced off to a restaurant across town where I ordered to-go food and ate in the front seat of my Subaru. We car camped in a Walmart parking lot that night. I returned to the apartment the following day, my laundry stored on the couch, no apparent signs of anyone trying to enter the place. Everything seemed normal. I never experienced any disruption in that place again for the year and a half I lived there afterwards. I have no idea to this day what I experienced, and it wasn't until I shared the story that I heard the knocking and sense of being observed was somewhat a common phenomenon that people relate to encounters with skinwalkers. I don't know what the fuck happened that night, but I'd marked myself incredibly lucky if I never had to experience something like that again. My father and uncle have a story of living as outsiders, non-native, Caucasian, young people on their reservation. This is their tale of experiencing a skinwalker. My grandma taught school on the reservation, and they lived well off compared to the natives living there. From what I know, there's a lot of lore surrounding the Navajo Nation. Non-natives, primarily older generations, keeping their experiences and stories left unspoken, especially to those not from the culture. Forgive me if I'm mistaken in any of this, the culture, ideology, practices, or any other part. I'm just trying to tell the story my family has only spoken to me in whispers about. My grandmother, father, and uncle lived there for a few years, and their experience was much different than the Navajo people who lived there for generations upon generations. I just want to tell their story and get insight as to anyone else who lived there in that community, or any other stories some people might be willing to share. My father and uncle are about 2 years apart in age. They lived in Navajo Mountains in the 1980s. My dad was 10 to 12 and my uncle was younger. As it goes, they were always outside riding their bikes with their friends, natives of the reservation. My grandma was recovering from an abusive relationship with their father and wasn't too concerned about their whereabouts, being it was a small community. There wasn't much trouble around, nor would they know what real trouble was at that age. Trouble wasn't the issue to young white boys on the reservation then. Pure terror was. It was a typical night without any parental supervision. The night was colder than usual, and the night sky was blacker than you could imagine. In such a desolate place, the stars in the sky would light the night. This night was as if Earth had moved to a different dimension, an abyss. The boys raced each other, as they did every night, until they were compelled to force their brakes in unison. They simultaneously looked up, each boy's face melted from carefree, innocent, and adolescent to unadulterated horror. The boys stood motionless, grasping their bikes with every nerve, muscle, and strength in their body on the dirt road. To the right of them was a mesa, one they rode by every day. The mesa that paralleled from my family's home. The mesa that they could see through my father and uncle's bedroom every night. This mesa would become a fear and nightmares to them from this night forward. At the top of the mesa was a roaring fire, taller than any bonfire that someone could assemble, bigger than a group of people could assemble. It raged and was unbelievable. It was almost as tall as the mesa itself. More unbelievable was the pitch-black figures seen cavorting around the bonfire. The native boys with my father and uncle informed them that this was not a typical Navajo dance or ritual. Pits began to form in their stomachs. Friends of my father and uncle turned back around without a word and bolted to their homes. My father and uncle threw their bikes to the ground and ran across the unpaved road to their home. The two came back in a panic, relaying what they'd seen to my grandmother, but she was unconcerned. A legend of the natives, she told them, and shooed them away. They laid awake all night in their shared room, not saying a word to one another. They forced their curtains as close as possible, too scared to look out the window and see what they shouldn't have to begin with. Neither could shake the images burnt into their memory. But the sun managed to rise and peeked through their room. A sense of release washed over them as the darkness had faded. The boys left their beds and traveled to the kitchen to try it a second time to tell my grandmother what they saw that night. They tried to get a handle on what they saw, but it was as if they couldn't explain it. Again, my grandmother brushed them off, with a coffee and newspaper more important than their story. She told them to climb the mesa and investigate. The boys wrangled their friends who shared their experience of the night prior as they pressed on their bikes. The friends stayed on the dirt road, looking up at the mesa as my father and uncle climbed up to see with any evidence of the hell-burning fire they witnessed together. The mesa wasn't much taller than an average one-story house, so the brothers took less than 2 minutes to climb to the top, where the nightmare took place. When they got to the top, they were hysterical and also relieved. There was no indication of a bonfire of that enormity, or even a fire at all, had taken place on the mesa. They had clearly seen it the night earlier. They climbed down and told the message to their friends, who had also been a part of the shocking scene. Their native friends looked at them in shock, but neither said a word to them. They immediately turned their bikes around and proceeded home. It was never talked about again, despite my father and brother asking about it. My grandmother and everyone else in the community refused to talk about it again. My father is a skeptic. He does not believe in anything paranormal, aliens, ghosts, mermaids, you name it. But whenever I ask about the skinwalker he saw, he turns pale and white. He gets quiet, jumping and curts. I had to plead to get the full story out of him, and I could see goosebumps and every hair standing on his arms when he shared this experience. My grandma took me to Navajo Mountains in 2019 to show me her history, how Navajo natives still live on the reservation today. According to her, not much has changed since living there in the 80s. I hiked and explored what I could of the reservation, as to not invade or violate any of the Navajo reservation and its beauty. However, I did feel a change in mood when I visited. My existence felt heavy, as if I wasn't supposed to be there, or if I was invading on their territory that wasn't meant for me. Not caused by any of the community there, but just by my presence being on the land. I will never forget this experience visiting, and all that I learned about the reservation life. My intention is to hear any other stories from Navajo Mountain residents, or talk with some people with similar stories in the Navajo reservation. I climbed the mesa where the skinwalker my dad and uncle claimed had its ritual. I felt pretty normal until I got to the top and stood in the middle. I felt some darkness creep into me as I stood there. I've never been the same since. And that's it for this story. I again apologize for only uploading one video this week. It's been hectic, but if you did enjoy this video, please let me know, and please share any experiences you have. In my description you will find a Patreon if you would like to support the channel. You don't have to. And I will see you guys next week. Bye bye. And I can go play boy and father. Jesus.